So we are going to get started by looking at the finance reports menu, and we're going to start by talking about the first financial report, which is this income and expenditure by fund report. This is one of the most commonly used reports inside ExpensePlus. So I'm going to talk you through how this works, what it shows, how you might want to customize it for your church or charity, and I will just check my notes as we go through that I cover everything for you. So to view this report, you click on the report, and we'll cover later how you give other users access to this report, but hopefully you might have seen this report before. And the first thing to mention is there are different tabs across the top of this screen. So if you're looking at this today and thinking, Sam, this is great, but we don't actually want to report on our finances by month, we prefer to report by quarter, well, then there's a tab for you up here. If you want to look at a specific month, there's a tab for you as well. And if you just want to look at kind of totals only for the year, then you can also look at this tab. We're majoritively going to focus around the monthly version of this tab, because this is one of the most commonly used versions of this tab. But just to let you know, there are different tabs, and it's worth looking out for those in the different financial reports and different screens within ExpensePlus. So what does this report show us then? It shows us a breakdown of the income and expenditure for the fund that we are looking at. Now, in this example, we are just looking at the general fund. A really important point to note is this is going to show us the income and expenditure to whatever today's date is. So if we have only reconciled our bank transactions up until the end of last month, then it's really important, if we want this report to be accurate, to change the date that we want to view to. So we're going to change that to the 31st of October, and I'd recommend that you just kind of clock that and make a note to do that, because that means that anything that's after that date has now disappeared from the screen. There's a note at the top of this report which says transactions may be missing from this report. This is a key to let you know that there are unreconciled transactions within the date range that you're viewing, i.e. this report might not contain everything. So again, this triangle is there to help you. You can click on here, you can see what it's trying to tell you. It's trying to tell us that we've got a transaction back dated in June that we haven't reconciled yet. And so obviously if you see that, then you want to go and have a look at that and make sure you know what's going on. Maybe you need to reconcile that transaction before returning to this report. And so hopefully that makes sense. So we're viewing our 2025 financial year. We're viewing up until the end of October. We're just viewing our general fund, but if we want to, we can view other funds as well inside this drop-down list. And so let's have a look at what this is showing us then. So what this is showing us is our different income and expenditure categories, or nominal codes as you might know them. And so we're seeing 4 different donation categories underneath this category group, which is called donations. You may see different to this, because it's up to you to decide how best to kind of divide up or kind of show your organization's income and expenditure. So for example, my church might have 4 donation categories. Your organization may have 6. That's okay. You get to break down your income and expenditure how you would like. And that's a really important point. This report is not meant to be a year-end report. There's brilliant year-end reporting built into ExpensePlus. How you wish to structure your categories should be based around how you want to, for internal purposes, report your breakdown of your income and expenditure. So you can create your year-end reports regardless of how you decide to break down your income and expenditure here. And we'll cover a little bit in 5 or 6 minutes time. So we'll cover how you can set up and customize your different categories. But the reason that we have 4 donation categories here, and the reason that we have this gift aid category group below it with gift aid categories, with our kind of gift aid category below, is that's how we've set up this example organization for your church or charity. When you first come to ExpensePlus, one of the 5 simple setup steps is to set up and customize your categories. So you'll get a few example ones. Feel free to delete or to edit those so that you have your category structure exactly as you would like it. It's also worth noting that whilst the categories in each section, so in each category group, these blue lines will always appear in alphabetical order, it is possible to change the order of the blue kind of category groups. If you would like to do that, then I think it's within customize here. Yep. We have got this thing of sort category group order. You can either sort by position, which is you choose the order, or you can sort by name, which is the default one. So if you're wondering why you have a kind of category group at the top, which you don't kind of want there, you want it lower down, then do feel free to change this to sort by position, as you're seeing me do here. Then within the category settings screen that we'll look at shortly, then you can actually define the order that you want for these blue line category groups. So we've talked about kind of customizing the categories. So these can appear based on how you want to break down your income and expenditure. We've talked about category groups, which are these nice blue kind of section headings. And one of the reasons for that, as well as making this report divide up and look nice and give us nice subtotals, is there's also a feature at the top of this report where you can scrunch this report up essentially just to view it at category group only. So if we click this option, what it's doing now is it's essentially just reporting at those kind of group totals. And this might be useful where you want to share a report with some people, but you don't want it to have too much detail. This would be what you do with that. The next thing to mention is this report is drillable, and that's brilliant because no longer do you have a flat financial report where you're looking at this. Maybe we're sitting in our finance team meeting and you're like, oh, okay, Sam, what is this £22.50 we spent on travel in April? I don't have to have memorized everything before the meeting. I also don't have to kind of wade through paperwork to try and find the answer. ExpensePlus is drillable, so I can just click on that particular category for that particular month. It shows me any transactions there. In this case, I can drill into the transaction. So it's really, really drillable. And so this is one of the reasons that we'll talk about where you should try and give people access to ExpensePlus, because then they can just find the data they need rather than it being a flat report and everything has to kind of come through the bookkeeper to try and find the answer to any questions. Actually, people can answer their own questions with this brilliant drill function. I've mentioned that you can select multiple funds in this report, or you can change the fund that you select, and that's brilliant. We will talk. It's worth mentioning that there is a feature inside ExpensePlus called category connectors. So, for example, for this organization, we might say, well, actually, we want all of the income expenditure for all of the organization. We might select all. If we do that, we're just going to end up with a very, very, very long list of income categories and expenditure categories. If you're wanting to view all income and expenditure across the whole of your charity, then you should check out a feature called Category Connectors. We'll be covering it in the next Lunch and Learn session, which is kind of advanced financial reporting, where we go through that in detail. But it's worth bearing in mind there is a better way to view income and expenditure across your whole charity rather than just selecting all in this particular screen. So hopefully that makes sense. There's also other filters for you to be aware of. There's a simplified view. If you're like, this is great, but it's a bit overkill for my organization, then you can go for the simplified view, which hides some of the columns. There's also the ability to round whole numbers. So rather than showing kind of to the penny, you can round to the pound, and that is a useful feature. However, do note, if you round numbers, then it may appear that the totals don't add up. And that is because you end up with a different answer mathematically, whether you round numbers and then add them, or whether you add them, then round them. The two do not necessarily give you the same answer. You will have the correct finance reports inside ExpensePlus, but just if you choose to do the rounding option, then you sit there manually adding up a column. You may end up with a different answer at the bottom, and that's because ExpensePlus is not adding up the rounded numbers. It's adding up the unrounded numbers and then rounding, whereas you're looking at the columns rounded and then adding, so that could equal a different number. There's a brilliant help guide article if you do choose to do that. You may just decide to just keep it at kind of pounds and pence, in which case you've got that option on here. You also can, inside these reports, be able to see your budget and how much you've kind of projected. You can also see how variance date based on how much you spent. So in this example here, we can see that the total actual income is £31,442 based on the date that we're viewing to. We can see that the anticipated amount of income that we're expecting to receive at the particular view to date was £30,000. Therefore, we can see that we're 5% up year to date on where we anticipated to be. If you would prefer to see this variance rather than a percentage as an actual amount, you can switch to actual amounts here. And now it tells us exactly that actually we're £1,442 up. So again, you can toggle the variance based on what you wish to see. We can see the total budget for this particular category is £36,000. We can see that 87% of that has come in year to date. And we can also get ExpensePlus to forward project for us based on what we've told it and how we've told it to project for this particular category, which we'll cover when we look at category settings in just a moment. Before we move on from this, I wanted to mention a couple of other features. Firstly, all reports inside ExpensePlus are downloadable either to PDF or to CSV, and it's worth bearing that in mind. If you want to export this report and do something with it, then you have got that option. The other thing I wanted to mention is this report is going to be showing based on the accounting basis that you've selected. Now, if you work on a cash basis, otherwise known as receipts and payments, then your income and expenditure inside ExpensePlus is going to show based on the bank statement date, essentially. So if money comes into your bank today, where's the income going to show? It's going to show today. And that's what it kind of working on a cash basis looks like. If, however, you create accounts on an accruals basis and have a feature that we call auto accruals enabled, which by default it will be, then ExpensePlus will show the income and expenditure based on the date the transaction relates to, which may or may not necessarily be the date that it comes into or out of your bank account. So my note here is that regardless of your accounting basis, then your income and expenditure will be shown correctly, and it will be shown on the accounting basis that you have decided. Now, I just mentioned there that you can set budget amounts inside ExpensePlus, and it's highly recommended that as you get familiar with ExpensePlus, that you do consider doing that. Obviously, having a budget helps ensure that you've got a good plan. It enables you in this report to compare kind of how you're doing with your kind of actual income versus your actual plan. So it allows you to kind of have some comparison as to where you're up to. And as mentioned, it also allows you to forward project your income and expenditure, and we'll look at that inside the category settings in a moment. So let's look at that now. Let's dive into how you kind of set up categories and how you can kind of customize them. You'll find this inside the settings menu, which is this cog icon in the top right hand corner. You can also get there from the sidebar menu, which is down here. Both will take you to exactly the same place, which is this menu. If we click into categories, we can see the categories that have been set up for this particular fund. If you want to look at a different fund, then just change the drop down here. If you want to look at a different financial year, then feel free to change the drop down here. It's worth noting that categories are per financial year, which is brilliant, because when you come to your new financial year, your previous year categories will get copied into that. But then if you want to delete some of them, you want to add some new ones, maybe you've got a new project going on, you can customize the categories in the new financial year, or you can change the budget amounts in the new financial year without affecting the prior financial year. So it's worth noting that. Now, inside this screen, there are different tabs across the top. We're in the category details tab. This is typically what you want to be as you set up your categories. As mentioned, you can change the order of category groups. These are the blue lines. You can just use these up and down arrows to do that. And if you want to add a new category under this category group, you can either click add category, or you can click the plus button to the right hand side to add a new category. So your categories and your income and expenditure by fund report are based on how you set up your categories inside this screen. Budget details then is the tab that you need if you're going to set budget amounts. There are two ways that you can set budget amounts. One is to set them linearly. This is what you'll do for most categories. You'll enter the total amount for the year of either income or expenditure, and ExpensePlus will say, thanks very much, I'll divide that by 12, assuming you have 12 months in your financial year, and it'll be this amount per month. That works for most of your categories that you'll want that. However, you can also custom set, and custom set is great, particularly where you have a one-off project or event where the income and expenditure is not going to be divided by 12. Actually, it's going to specifically come in this month and be spent in this other month. Then you can set this to custom, which just allows you to specifically set where you're expecting the income and expenditure to happen. And that means, again, in the income and expenditure report, you're comparing versus the plan that you believe is going to happen versus something that's kind of made up. So do check out how you can set up your budget profiles. You just click on budget profiles. If we want to change this one to linear, we can just click here and we can switch to linear if we want to. So when you're setting up your budget amounts, that is what you do. I also mentioned you can change how you project, and there are three ways that you can project the income and expenditure of a particular category. Let me just briefly explain these to you. And so firstly, if you click on here, so this one, the option is scaled. Scaled is typically what you'll want. And so scaled essentially takes what's happened to date and it forward projects it onto the rest of the financial year. So for example, if your income is 5% up to the date that you're viewing, so it's 5% above your plan, then ExpensePlus for that category, if you set it to scale project, it will go, great, well, for the remaining months, whatever you've budgeted, let's assume those are 5% up as well. And it will give you a projected total for the year based on that. Fixed is the option that you want to use where you know better. So for example, you're in month one and you've said that you're going to get 10K's worth of grants this year. And it just so happens that you get a 10K grant in month one, and that's probably all you're going to get. If you go for scale, then ExpensePlus is going to go, Brill, that's absolutely amazing. You've got 10K in month one, and actually on this kind of projected basis, because it was 10K over 12 months, well, you're only expected to get about £850 worth of grant in month one. Let's pretend all months are going to be that much better. And so you wouldn't want that for categories like grants. So you'd probably go for the fixed option, which is, look, don't get excited, ExpensePlus. I'm telling you that 10K is the amount for the year. So when you're projecting, please just stick with what I've told you. And so that's the option of fixed. Adjusted is a halfway house. Adjusted is like, great, our grants are up year to date. I wasn't expecting that. So do account for anything that's already happened, but don't presume it's going to carry on for the rest of the financial year. Don't scale everything. Just, carry on from the date onwards that we're up to and pretend that's going to end on budget. But do account for the fact that the first 10 months in this case are either up or down on budget. And so adjusted is what you'd use if you want that option. So you can set per category how you want ExpensePlus to forward project. And that just means in the income and expenditure report, you will be able to kind of compare versus what you're expecting to happen. So before I hand over to Jack, I'm just going to come back to the income and expenditure by fund report. Remember, do select the view to date that you're viewing to. As one point to make sure things are correct. Do check that you've reconciled all the transactions that you need to have been reconciling, and check that this note doesn't appear at the top of the screen. In terms of how you use this report, well, if I was looking at this report and I was about to kind of share it with my trustees, I'd be looking to say, look, does everything look correct? And one way you can do this is by kind of focusing on your category to group totals. It looks like we're 15% down on donations versus where we're expected to be. Does that look correct? And similarly, you can do the similar things with your expenditure. You can start interrogating, understanding, okay, does that look right? Can we explain why this is? And remember, ExpensePlus is drillable. So if you're wondering why a particular category is overspent, you can drill into it. You can have a look at it. You can go and speak to the budget holder if you need to. So you need to be looking at things that might not be correct. You also, as you do that, you want to focus on areas of big income and expenditure. So although, for example, in this particular category group of comms, we're 275% kind of over where we expected to be, which is, quite big. Actually, if we look at the total budget for the year for this particular category, it's only £350. So we don't really need to get too excited. We probably want to do something about that, but we don't kind of massively. That's not our biggest priority. Whereas if we come down to, for example, our staffing category, whereas our staffing category in here, our staffing category here, can we see that we've got an expenditure of 32,000, much more significant. And so we're going to focus on this one, because if this particular category kind of group area gets overspent, then that's going to be a big problem, because that's going to cause a far greater impact, even being say 5% out, than kind of an area where there's low expenditure. And that's where you might want to switch to using show by amount, because actually, rather than just seeing a large percentage, this will show you kind of the raw variance to date. Another thing that you want to be looking at when you're in here is you want to be looking at things that are coded to either your other income category, your other expenditure category, or if like most organizations, you have a Z category, which is the kind of, we'll park it there until we know where to allocate it to. As you're looking at this report here, we've got one here, transactions to be recoded. I'm looking to say, well, what is that? Because ultimately this doesn't want to live in this category. This is like a parking category, but that's not where this should live finally in my report. So it's great that it's in here affecting my income and expenditure, but I'd really rather allocate it to the particular category it relates to. And so you should, as part of checking this report, look to reallocate anything that's kind of wrongly allocated or temporarily allocated. Another thing that's really important when you're looking at this report is to consider whether you've recorded, particularly if you're looking at your general fund, your unrestricted fund, have you recorded any restricted income or expenditure to this particular fund? And this is a really common mistake we see a lot of churches and charities making. A way to avoid this mistake is don't create yourself a grants category inside your general unrestricted fund. Nearly all grants are restricted in some way. You can't just spend them on anything that your charity wants to, and therefore typically avoid having a grant category. Similarly, if I see an income category in here, maybe a donations category called food bank or special offering, again, that should ring alarm bells, because chances are that money is restricted and so shouldn't have been recorded to your unrestricted general fund. It should be put in its own separate fund, a restrictive fund that is for that purpose. So do also, as you're going through this report, just ask yourself the question, have I recorded any restricted income in particular to this general fund when it shouldn't be there? And similarly, have I recorded expenditures to this fund when actually I've got a separate restricted fund to pay for it? And so again, these are the questions you should be asking as you go through. If you're working on an accruals basis, then you will need to probably capitalize any assets that are purchased that are over the threshold for capitalization. Maybe that's £1,000 for your church or charity. And so whether you do this in year or whether you do this as part of your year end, you need to consider, have I got any fixed assets, maybe a minibus or maybe a laptop that's worth over £1,000? Have I got that coded as expenditure? And then you need to make the decision of, do you change that and make it capitalized during the year, or are you going to wait till the year end to do that? Ultimately, though, any fixed asset purchases need to not show in the income and expenditure report, and you will need to update them to be capitalized, which you do simply by clicking into the purchase and changing the category selected to be a fixed asset category, not an expenditure category. A few other things that you should be looking for then. One thing you might be looking for is any adjustments that need to be made. So if we come down to our insurance category, I'm not sure where it is in this report, but if we were to come down to our insurance category, here it is. And actually there's no expenditure showing here, but let's pretend in October we saw a massive £5,000 worth of expenditure. That might trigger us to think, actually, if we're working on an accruals basis, we need to add a prepayment adjustment for that because some of that relates to our next financial year. And so you also, as you're looking through this report, want to be asking, are there any adjustments needed? And that's just if you work on an accruals basis. If you work on a cash basis or receipts and payments basis, as it's also known, then you shouldn't be making adjustments like that. So you can just ignore what I have just said. Okay, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to in this report. Let me just have a quick look at my notes. Yeah, so make sure you set up categories on what's going to be useful for your organization. The next one, sorry, is keep it simple. Like loads of organizations create themselves, 50 income categories, 100 expenditure categories. ExpensePlus is drillable, so you don't actually need to create categories for absolutely everything under the sun. You can actually just drill in and be able to see the detail that you need to. Less is more typically. People are much more likely to read your finance report if you send them a report that's 2 pages long rather than that's 5 pages long, which you love because you can, see a breakdown of everything from, the amount of milk you buy each month. Actually, for the average user, it's going to stop them accessing your finance reports, which means the impact of them is going to be far less. It's also worth noting that we have a suite of donation reports as well as finance reports inside ExpensePlus. So lots of the things you might want to do around donation reporting, you can do inside the donation reports. So again, you don't necessarily need 10 different donation categories inside your general fund. You may well find you can go for less and use those other reports. And then finally, a couple of things in terms of giving users access to these reports. So these reports are brilliant. They are in real time if you are uploading your transactions and reconciling them in real time, or you're working on an accruals basis, then they'll also be in real time. And so why keep these reports to yourself? Traditionally, the reports would be put together by the person doing bookkeeping and then shared maybe around now for last month. Well, some of that income and expenditure happened like 5 or 6 weeks ago. Like if you're wanting your team to engage in the finances of your charity, you need to be giving them access to be able to see in that data in live time. And with ExpensePlus, you can do. We don't charge per user. You can give users access where they need to have access. And the way you do that is you come to settings, which you'll find in the top right-hand corner again here. You can come to users, and then if we look at user roles, for each user role, you can define which reports the users can have. When we come in here for our trustees, we can say, look, anyone with a user role of trustees, and then we can decide which reports they have access to, which will now enable them to see when they need to, when they're trying to make financial decisions, when they're trying to, at 11 o'clock last night, think, okay, well, I just want to have a look at that. They don't have to wait for you to answer their questions. They can just get the information directly themselves. So this is user roles. So you define which reports users can access within their user roles. And then when you're adding a user, you simply click on the user in question. So we can click add new user. We give them a role, maybe the role of trustee, and that's going to determine which reports they have access to. But per user, you can also customize what they can see and do. So if we say, look, this trustee can access our general fund, in fact, they can also access our food bank fund, we can then go into here and we can say, actually, we want to give them summary level access, which means they see high level access to all of those different categories. And we'll let them drill into these 2 particular categories. So actually per user with the income expenditure by fund report, you don't just have to give their users access to everything or nothing. You can create each user their own customized version of this report in here. So you can decide which categories they can see, which is the summary level. So what category is going to appear on their income expenditure by fund report, and which ones can they drill into? And that's the transactional level where you can decide that. And so this is brilliant. It will enable your budget holders and those making decisions to feel empowered to be able to see the information they need to engage with your charity's finances. And it also means then they can make better financial decisions. And it stops those bottlenecks where everything needs to come through the bookkeeper. And so when you're kind of thinking about the reports that you might want to send out to the different people in your organization, then you want to be thinking, actually, can I just give them access to ExpensePlus? Once you give them access once, they'll have access and they'll be able to see the things that you want them to be able to see. I'm going to hand back to Jack now. He's going to take us through the next section, which is all to do with the fund movement summary.
Thank you very much, Sam. Yes, we are going to take a quick look at the fund movement summary. So you can find that within your finance reports and your fund movement summary will be here. This report shows all your different funds and what the balances of each of those funds kind of were at the start of the financial year in your opening balances. You can see the income that's come in, the expenditure that's come out, and you can see your closing balance at the end as well. I'm going to firstly cover what funds are and a little note on what funds are not as we dive into this report. So funds are basically ways of splitting up your income and expenditure into different pots of money with different purposes. So for example, if you ask people to give to support your food bank, there should be a protected pot of money that this gift goes to ensure it's spent on supporting the food bank. These funds allow you to track the income in, expenditure out, and ensure that money is being spent where it should be. Now, what funds are not is that funds are not bank accounts. So you can have one bank account and 30 different funds within ExpensePlus. That is absolutely fine. So the type of funds you're likely to have a general fund, which would be unrestricted, where that money that comes into that fund can be spent in any way that meets the general aims of your charity. But you might also have some restricted funds, so money for a specific purpose. So the example I gave of the food bank, if people have given money for the food bank, then that money can only be spent on things that go towards advancing the food bank. You might also have some designated funds. These are funds set aside by trustees. For example, you might have a reserves fund set aside where 3 months of salary costs are put aside into your reserves fund. To find out more on the different types of funds, we do have a really great blog post called What is Fund Accounting, and we will make sure that we get that link to you at the end of this session. So, important notes about the fund movement summary. Like Sam said with the income and expenditure report, it's really important that you set the date limits for this report, how you want to see them. If you don't change the date to be kind of the end of the month that you want to see, there might be some transactions included in the report that you weren't necessarily counting on and could cause a little bit of confusion. So make sure you set your to view date correctly. And if you're working on an accruals basis, just a heads up, your fund balances will be made up of just cash. But if you are working on accruals basis, your fund balances will be made up of more than just cash. That'll be things like fixed assets, accounts payable and receivable, loans, things like that. So your closing balances in this end column here doesn't tell you everything about your funds, but it does give a good overview of how they are doing. Which is why it's important to have an understanding of the balance sheet report, which provides that breakdown of what each of your fund balances are made up of, and we will explore that in a couple of minutes' time. But we'll stick to the fund movement summary to start with. So the fund movement summary is really useful to see, like I said, where each fund started the year, how much income has come into each fund, and how much expenditure has gone out of each fund. This report is viewable. For example, this organization has a fund. Has a fund called Youth Worker. You can see the opening balance there was £20,000. There's been no income into this fund, but there has been £18,000 worth of expenditure, meaning that our closing balance is at £2,000. We are on track with this fund towards like a zero closing balance, or maybe even a negative closing balance. So this report is really useful to see how our funds are doing, what the balance is like, and then we can start to ask questions about what is going to happen when we see a trend like that. So is this youth worker salary covered? Are we going to need to cover that salary through our general fund, or have we got other plans in place for what might happen at the end of that, well, when that closing balance approaches zero? This report is also really good for seeing where money is going in and out of and spotting trends that need addressing. So for example, if there's not much expenditure going out of the food bank fund, which is the case in here, we just want to ask a question, is that correct? Have we only spent £200 out of the food bank fund, or is this a chance for us to check whether we have allocated expenditure to the general fund that could or should be allocated to the food bank? Because our general rule is that if you have the option of using restricted fund for an expenditure, then you should. You want to use up your restricted funds before you start using your general fund. So this would be a good opportunity for this organization to look at the expenditure that they have assigned to their general fund and just see, have we incorrectly been applying expenditure to the general fund that could be part of the food bank fund. This report also is really helpful to see which restricted pots have been used up or approaching being used up, like we said with that youth worker grant, and how are we going to cover for the expenditure that is going to go out for the rest of the financial year? Are we going to need to cover that through the general fund? Do we need to apply for another grant? What kind of planning do we have in place for going forward? So we'll move on to look quickly at the balance sheet report as well. So again, you can find that in your finance reports and click on your balance sheet. If you operate on a receipts and payments basis, you won't actually see this report. Your fund balances are your cash balances. So at the end of the financial year, you do get to specify non-cash balances through your assets and liability statement. So for example, that could be any loans or fixed assets or other things go into that report. And you can learn more about that report and that assets and liability statement in our year-end receipts and payments lunch and learn, which we have coming up in early December. I think that's on the 4th of December. But if you are on an accruals basis, you will be able to see your balance sheet. And there are several ways that we can view this report. We have the on-date view here, where you can select, you can see your balance sheet up to today's date, or you can change that date to view it to a certain day of the year if you so wish. This is kind of the classic version of the balance sheet, where you can view all your funds, you can select a group of funds, or you can choose just one fund that you want to look at in the on-date view. You can also view this report in the monthly setting. This would be helpful if you want to see how things that make up your fund balances are changing. So for example, the cash balance of your general fund, of our general fund here, isn't really changing all that much. I can show you that by just choosing the general fund and having a look. Our cash balance is fairly consistent, not too big fluctuations across that. And that's a good thing. But if that was reducing heavily and we could see our cash balance was dropping and dropping and dropping, we'd want to know that in advance, and this report is a really good way of seeing that and being able to be aware of what trends are coming. You can also view this report by fund. And so this would be helpful to understand how assets and liabilities break down between your funds. So for example, if we select all of our funds to view this, we can then have a look at, for example, that this organization, it has a good chunk of fixed assets in their food bank fund, which might be really important to know, might be really helpful to think about where have we allocated our fixed assets to, rather than having to search through every fund to look at how many fixed assets are or what value of fixed assets are assigned to it. You can view them all together and you'll be able to identify exactly where you've allocated some of your fixed assets. And then in this report, you can also view by fund type. Now, this is your year-end view of the balance sheet. So you can see through this your restricted and unrestricted funds. You might be thinking, why can't I see any designated funds in here? And then that's because designated funds are a type of unrestricted fund. And this is one that you'll look at more at year end rather than on a monthly or weekly basis. So we're going to go back to the on date view for this screen and have a look at what the balance sheet shows us. So as you can see, there are some green lines and some red lines in this balance sheet. Now, your green lines are assets that add to our fund balance, and the red lines are liabilities that take away from that fund balance. So within your assets, you've got your cash assets here. You also have accounts receivable. That is money that's due in that hasn't yet been received. So an example of this might be a gift aid claim where the money hasn't actually been received yet, but it is still due to you. You've also got prepayments in your assets. Though these are things that you have spent money on in advance. So an example of this might be your insurance for the next financial year paid up front. So that's still an asset to your organization, even though it's no longer counted in your cash balance.
Thanks so much, Jack. So as we're coming into land at this point, if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the Zoom chat to Jack, and we will cover your questions at the end. I've already mentioned about how you set up users using that cog icon in the top right-hand corner, where you can go into the user roles to give users with a particular role access to different financial reports, and how you can further customize that access specifically for this summary by fund report, where you can specifically give each member of your team access to the different kind of income and expenditure and balance lines on this report that you specifically want them to be able to see. It's a really unique feature inside Expense Plus, but it's also a really brilliant feature as well. Far too many churches and charities have budget holders that can't actually see their income and expenditure in real time, and therefore they have no way of managing their income and expenditure. And so they take kind of little kind of responsibility, but they can't really take any responsibility because they can't see what is going on with their with your financial reports. If you want people in your team to engage with finances, our recommendation is keep it simple in terms of how you're structuring reports and make sure people have access, and then train them. Tell them what these reports mean. Tell them what to look for. Explain to them how to manage a budget. You might know this yourself, but unless you actually train the people in your organization that are responsible for the income and expenditure of your charity's money, then actually, unsurprisingly, you may well find that they're not actually doing what you're hoping they're going to do. It's one of the most common issues that we see. One is users not having access to the data they need. Two is not giving them training. For example, I might choose to be really frugal with my money. I might choose to, not spend anything. I'll wait till my laptop breaks before buying a new one. Whereas you may say, hey, I've just seen this new thing on Amazon. I'm going to buy it right now. And people bring to the managing of your organization's kind of finances their own preferences, their own way that they've been taught or not taught to manage money. They may think some things are acceptable, you may not. Equally, they may not understand what to even do with a kind of report. And so actually, unless you train your team, unless you kind of give them information about what you're going to do and what you need them to do in terms of managing your charity's money, then unsurprisingly, you may find that they do things that you're maybe not wanting them to do, etc. And so it's all about having a conversation. It's all about training. It's all about kind of upskilling your team to actually feel confident with the finance reports that you are sharing with them. So we'd highly recommend that if you haven't thought about that, you do have a think about it. In terms of giving users access to Expense Plus, you might be thinking, well, Sam, well, yeah, I get there'll be some benefit in that. I get that the kids' work of being able to actually see in live time what they spent. I get that that's going to be great for them, but surely that's just going to cost us more money if we add more users. The answer is no, it's not. We've designed Expense Plus so that actually all the users in your team that need access can access it, which is why we don't price Expense Plus based on users at all. And so go ahead, consider who needs access. What more could you get your team to do? How much more ownership could they take of your church or charity's finances if they're trained and if they're given access to see just the information that you need them to be able to see? And as mentioned, you can customize Expense Plus to enable that to happen. As we come into land, I just want to talk about sharing financial reports then. This is obviously a common thing that most churches or charities do, particularly at the start of the new month. For the previous month, you'll often find an email that might go out or a meeting that might happen where people go through the kind of the finances for the church or charity. And you might think, I know exactly what I'm going to do with that, in which case, feel free just to stick around for the Q&A, which will be happening in a few minutes' time. If not, I'm just going to give you some ideas of what you might want to consider in terms of what information you share. Now, I'm a really big believer of keeping things simple. Just because you understand all of the finance reports for your church or charity and you're really excited about this really long, complicated report, the average person is not going to be. So I want to implore you to consider, are your finance reports simple? Because actually the messages and the key things that you're wanting people to pick up through your finance reports could well be lost. To that end, if you are going to send out an email which has a kind of summary of where you're up to with your finances at the end of each month or at the end of each quarter, my recommendation is that email is kept simple. Just because once upon a time Bob wanted to know specifically, how many yellow t-shirts you'd sold in a particular month, that does not mean that that needs to just join your financial information that you send out each month, and every month that goes by, your charity just has more and more complicated reporting. Consider stripping it back. So what I'd recommend is a simple summary email. If you're going to send an email to the kind of trustees and finance teams, I'd recommend that email has 5 or 6 bullet points, which says the main things that people need to know. Income is currently on track year to date. Our food bank grant is going to run out towards the end of the year. We're busy applying for more grants. Our salaries category is overspent, but we had planned for this and we agreed with the trustees that this was going to be the case, that we were going to end 10 grand over what we were originally budgeted. It should include these kind of summary headings so that people getting that email know what's going on with your church or charity's finances. And you need to presume that they're not going to do anything else. So if they only got one thing, if they only got 5 or 6 bullet points, what are those 5 or 6 bullet points going to be? And so my recommendation is you really carefully think through what is it you're actually needing to share with the people that are going to get this summary report. Whilst you can then attach a load of reports to that email. Here's the 26 reports that you might possibly want to see. My recommendation again is to keep it simple. Why not provide them links so that they can click the link and they can view the report inside ExpensePlus? That way, if they've got permission to drill, they can even get excited and actually drill in and try and understand the reports for themselves, because part of this is about information sharing, about other people taking ownership of your church or charity's finances as well, obviously where that's applicable and where you give them user access. So my recommendation again wouldn't be to attach attachments, although obviously you can download them from ExpensePlus and attach, but why not consider including links where you can sort of say, as you can see, our expenditure for staffing is 10 grand overspent. Click here to find out more, where they can actually click in, they can see the detail of that. So do include links where you can. In terms of specifically what reports, you might be like, Sam, that's great, I hear you, but actually specifically what should I be sharing? You've shared some reports. I can see there's loads of other reports here. What should I be sharing in terms of kind of a trustee update or a summary update? I'd recommend these 3 reports. Firstly, the fund movement summary. This is a brilliant summary, as Jack has gone through, which just provides a top line level of detail of what funds your organization has. So which restricted, unrestricted, and designated funds you have, what the opening balance was, what income and expenditure has happened to date, any fund transfers that have happened between funds, and if you work on an accruals basis and are lucky enough to have investments or asset revaluation, obviously they'll show on here as well. But this is a brilliant kind of like very high level summary of what's going on with fund balances, income and expenditure. So I would recommend attaching a copy of this report, and then you may just need to do again a bit of training to explain what funds are to the people that are getting this report, and explain to them, where we've got a restricted pot of money, I'm showing you the income and expenditure, but we can't spend that money on anything else. And so just explaining to them what this report means. So that is one of your key financial reports. If you work on an accruals basis, as Jack's already covered, you can't see everything you need to in that report. That doesn't show you what your cash balances are if you work on an accruals basis. So if you work on an accruals basis, I'd also be including a copy of your balance sheet. It's up to you which version of the balance sheet you want to include. If you want to go really detailed, maybe go the by fund version. I'd personally go for this kind of very high level version in here. I'd be selecting all funds, selecting the view to date, and providing the trustees or the finance team with access to this. This just nicely, as Jack says, breaks down the different kind of assets and liabilities of your charity, which is a really important thing for people that are kind of managing your charity's finances to know. So I would be including a balance sheet if you work on an accruals basis. And then the third thing that I'd probably be including is summary by fund. Now, this essentially is a more detailed breakdown than the fund movement summary provides. And so for your general fund in particular, I'd be providing this level of reporting. Would I do this for every single fund? Probably not. Our trustees probably don't really need to see the breakdown of the youth worker grant, for example. It's not going to show for anything very exciting other than that we've had no income, as Jack's mentioned, and about 1.8K's worth of expenditure each month. There's probably not loads of benefit of showing that. And so remember, less is more. So just consider which income and expenditure by summary reports are needed. So I'd be sending this for the general fund, and for me, that's probably it. Also, remember that I might actually want to share this by grouping a category group level, just to give people information where they don't need to get super detailed. This could also be a useful thing. So in summary, do send obviously financial summaries. I think they're really helpful. Do keep them simple. Do stick to the 5 or 6 bullet points you actually want people to know. And then do consider which financial reports you include to give them a range of breakdown of income and expenditure, but also fund balances and what they're made up of.